Hello and welcome to a case for death metal's greatest album. Today we're going to be doing Demilich's Nespithe. Joining me today is Micah. Micah, who writes for Cavedweller from time to time and who's also very involved in the whole Terminus extreme metal podcast scene. So thanks for joining us today, Micah.
Of course, Nick. Always good to talk to you, my friend.
So let's start with this, okay? So do you want to start us off with some background on Demilich?
Ooh, yeah. Well, let's see. Um, when did they form? I'm gonna pull it up really quick. 90.
91 was the Regurgitation of Blood demo.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. Let's see. Pull back here. That's that first song, single track demo. But yeah, they formed in 90, in Kuopio, Finland. Uh, and I don't know what else to say other than at first, Demilich seems to be a not a bolt thrower clone, but definitely extremely inspired by bolt thrower on that first Four Instructive Tales demo. Um, and uh, although um, with the first song, the introduction and Embalmed Beauty Sleep, we can hear the beginnings of what will turn it into Nespithe, as there's certain parts that are kept from it that then reappear on that last track, but then completely pulled apart and reassembled into what Nespithe and Demilich had become by that time in 93.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we can easily say like obviously this album does not exist in a void despite how weird it is, but I do think that the main source of inspiration is British death metal, Bolt Thrower and Carcass, because Carcass had released Symphonies of Sickness and people just think, hey, it's the Death Grind album, but no, but it's got some really fucking weird songs. And you've got the second song on that album, Exhume to Consume, where you really hear the kind of like bass for a lot of those weird chromatic melodies. They're still really catchy at the same time.
Mm-hmm. As well, yeah. From stuff that we were talking about previously, before we started this, and then just some stuff that I read. As much as that is the kind of driving influential force behind Demilich, it seems that from what I had read, Anti kind of tried to keep himself inside of a vacuum as much as possible. And I don't know if this was the result of him being new to guitar, or I don't know how long he had been playing guitar at that point before Nespithe or the band had formed. But being an untrained guitar player and teaching himself these kind of other British riffs, and then as well, we'll get to stuff like Crematory from Sweden. He created his own weird geometric guitar system for coming up with these riffs.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like there is a logic, like you can hear it, and it's just these insanely weird patterns that feature very kind of like long jumps, right? Even between strings and everything. But I've
Mhm.
noticed it's very circular, or whatever, like a square, whatever you want to say. It always goes back to the starting point.
Yeah, when I've learned, because I remember I found Demilich pretty early on when I got into death metal in high school, as a recommendation from a record store guy. Uh, and when I had tried to learn some of these riffs, you're looking at the tabs and they just kind of go diagonal down, weird jumps, and then back up, up and down, up and down. It has this weird like back and forth movement, where they like circle in patterns, and then we'll add these kind of things right on the end, which is that weird out of time feeling almost, which doesn't at the same time. It probably feels pretty natural to Anti, especially now in the live videos, and you've seen them live. It's not as much as it sounds complicated to maybe a newcomer. It doesn't seem uh, all that complicated for him to perform these things because it just is how he plays guitar.
Yeah, I mean, I think even, when you see the way he plays, he does his vocals, people have asked him a million times and he says the same thing. I heard people growling. I tried to growl. That's what came out.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's the it's pasted all over the materials of the demos and all the physical copies I have everywhere. It says there's not affected. And then there's a YouTube video, I'm sure you've seen that one before. It's like anti-Bowman vocal demonstration where he's just somebody caught him on the street and he just really deep for the so yeah, it's interesting that that's the conclusion that he came up with. But and that's kind of a big uh I guess selling point or something that pushes people away completely from this music is his vocals. Um which I don't I think it adds to that weird idiosyncratic quality of the band.
Yeah, definitely. And it's weird because I looked up a few tabs. We'll talk about this later, but what's his name? Phil Tugos, who's kind of very responsible in many ways for bringing this band to light. He has some really good tabs, and you can tell this guy's he has no idea. Like he told me, like he only learned like 5 years ago what the hell the chromatic scale was. But I don't know how he manages to come up with these geometric patterns because they're very for even from a guitar player's perspective, where your fingers would naturally go, it's not intuitive at all, nor does it sound intuitive, but it just really works for this kind of stuff that he's doing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I can't really think of I mean uh because I was just playing it before we started, the definitely besides Bolt Thrower, like I mean War Master and those things that he was probably listening to, the Exordium demo from Crematory,
Yeah.
the first song on it, you hear the beginnings of songs like The Cry or The Echo with that weird up and down pattern that just must have latched onto Auntie and became uh, part of his style that then he just kind of continued to replicate and push as far as you can with a sound to the point where you have this kind of homogenous album like Nespithe, where everything has that can be said with that one riff, where there's tons of different styles of music, like you have like Senior Valon stuff or people pulling from Sargeist, where there's like a riff that people hear and they
Mm.
just continue to make things out of it. That's what he did with that Exordium riff, and that is, I feel like that's everything you could have said with Nespithe. He just took it to the final conclusion.
Yeah, definitely. But unlike Crematory, that like it's so I don't know how to say it. It's not that there's like a lack of rhythm, but there's like no consistent kind of steady beat to this.
Hmm.
Everything, it's constantly changing time signatures and not in a like subtle way like Tool where you don't really tell where you have to count. Here you can genuinely feel it from like bar to bar. I'm thinking on like halfway through when the sun drank the weight of water. There's a lot
Hmm.
of really fucking weird changes and they and they're not even that jarring, what I mean? It's like 9/8 to 7/8, but it's just really, really weird. And the way he kind of groups up those, the notes, the individual notes in his melodies, they're not in like groups of like 4 or 6 or 8 or whatever. It's like five, it's like seven, nine.
Hmm. Yeah, and definitely the one of the standout players in this whole group is definitely the drummer, Miko, in the way that he is able to modulate the rhythm of what Anti is playing with his accents from the drums.
And yeah, and he does this weird thing, even when the sun drank the weight of water, where he's like, you feel like he's hinting towards a blast. He's kind of like picking up the pace, but he never just goes, back to the very classical, the whatever, the basic blast beat pattern that was very popular at the
Hmm.
time. It's almost like I'm getting there, but then he goes into a fill, and then he just, it's up and down, and it just works really well with with what Auntie's doing on the guitar.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very controlled and thought out, but at the same time, it's very like ADD. Like they get tired of things quickly, so they're always moving on to something new.
Yeah, and then also there's something quite interesting. Like unlike their peers, they don't really rely on kind of like straight up tremolo picked riffs. Like there's a few across the album, but they're not really there. You know what I mean? The kind of classic, group notes into fours and just kind of tremolo pick through those melodies.
Hmm.
Or, the kind of like what a lot of Finnish bands were doing. There's something from Bolt Thrower, hey, just hold on to two power chords, for a riff, for a bar, whatever.
Right.
And there's none of that. Like it's like this kind of Slayer, pedal point thing, that even, a lot of other bands were doing, but just kind of pushed to insane extremes.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and that'd be I feel like it'd be really hard to play some of these, or practically impossible to play any of these riffs, tremolo, as like one continuous stream of notes. There has to be a change in the style of guitar playing, which is that like single plucked notes and then jumping to the next string
Mm,
in these kind of diagonal up and down patterns.
yeah. All right. Should we put on our first sample? Let's go with
Sure.
the classic When the Sun Drank the Weight of Water. This entire part for me is like quintessential Demilich and everything because despite how weird the melodies are, there is so much variation in mood. It's almost like chilled out at first, and then you have the uplifting solo, and then it gets into that really catchy yet super fucking dissonant harmony.
Yeah, no, I mean, and even the way that the song starts out on those high strings with the weird kind of intersecting tremolo part, and then just like full stop into those first riffs that open the song. I mean, it's a perfect way to introduce what Demilich can do because there's so many different parts in this song. I mean, all these songs have tons of parts, but yeah, that the breakdown that happens as well right before the solo, that's like one of my favorite Demilich riffs in general, where they're able to the whole stop start quality that they have is it's controlled chaos.
Yeah, literally. Um, and it's really interesting because I currently have the tab, so you can tell there's like some minor scaled stuff, but then he just adds these chromatic notes, And he's kind of like pulling, sliding, hammering on at these really random parts, and it just gives it such a unique groove.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't I mean this song is such a good indication of everything, but do you is there do you have a favorite song off of this? Because it's so hard for me to pick a because there's every song they're constructed of all of these similar parts where they're they're doing this the same type of up and down patterns and the strange metric modulation from the drums and then the break beats that are under it. But every song has some kind of standout catchy thing that you remember, whether it's an intro or a solo or even some of these songs, they just kind of they feel like they just go and go and go and go, and then just they like run out of steam almost,
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
yeah. No, I see exactly what you mean. Like, because I think sometimes the song structures here are really like the kind of weakest thing going on because it's very circular.
Hmm.
Once you're familiar with the album, you're never surprised by how it kind of ends. But because there are so many like peaks and valleys and ups and downs and lefts and rights, while you within that kind of very predictable song structure, it doesn't. I'm not really bothered by it because every part is so fucking good and everything is contrasted. It's like I think what makes this album really magical is that okay, sure, it's written in a really weird musical language, but they're not limited by that weird musical language, and they don't and within it they're capable of doing so much just from that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've always wondered because to me the biggest thing beside for the longest time, I mean the guitars were the most strange aspect of this music, but the thing that I've grown to love the most almost on this is purely the drums. I mean, it's like there's no other drum performance I've heard on an album that sounds quite like this. And I've always wondered because of the break beats and I mean there's some stuff like that that you hear in other Finnish bands like what is it? Disharmonic uh Orchestra, that band,
Mm.
where there's some like break beats. If he was listening to like maybe like early electronic music like jungle or something like that because it has it's not in any other uh death metal music that I can really think of.
Yeah, I mean, this harmonic orchestra were Austrian though. That's
Oh, they
all.
were?
Yeah.
Okay. I've always lumped them into the Finnish scene for some reason, but
But yeah, I do think I do agree with you. Like, I think what really does make this album also special is that the drumming does not come from a kind of like rock, blues, or the kind of very mainstream jazz and soul that led to heavy metal. Like it's not from that direct lineage, if that makes sense. Like you don't get there by listening to Slayer and Morbid Angel and Angel Witch.
hmm. Well, yeah, and I mean, because I was trying to find other bands besides some of these uh, death metal points that are things that are important to Auntie. And he also said in this booklet that I have from the Emptiness of Vanishing that Bad Religion was something that he really liked, as well as Nine Inch Nails and some other industrial music um, as well, which certainly adds to the kind of eclectic avant-garde quality that he's pulling from all these other places.
Yeah, I mean, what Nails album was out during that period? Because I'm not very comfortable with their discography.
No, neither am I.
It w- it would have been something like Pretty Hate Machine. Yeah, Pretty Hate Machine at that time. So a lot of the really kind of before they kind of got lumped in with that new metal crowd or anything. When it was really like industrial rock for people who are really into industrial.
Hmm.
But yeah, but I can definitely see that, like him being into all kinds of weird music, but not having the kind of the means to arrange that in a band setting, or to use, or the time to record that in a studio. And you just kind of have to come up with your own kind of like experimental sounds with the limited material you have.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so this was another thing that I that certainly adds to the sound that we'll get to is the tuning, because the guitars are tuned so low. Um, Now, you had said when we had talked that they had came to the conclusion of tuning the guitars, which were probably what they had nine string gauge strings on the guitars tuned all the way down to A because of a kazoo that they had
Yeah,
in
that's
their
what
practice space.
that's what Auntie told me, dude. He just said, "Oh, that's an A," and they just tuned the lowest string to that.
That's so crazy. But I mean, all of the Finnish bands were playing in this super low tuning, whether it was like A sharp standard or A standard, or think Ripikulu was tuned all the way down to like G.
Yeah,
Uh
G or F sharp or something
yeah, like
insane.
I don't know why, but I mean because you can kind of hear some of these things uh in other newer bands that have, because Demilich has spawned with the second wind that it got on the internet, all these newer bands that have been using Demilich as a touchstone for making their own death metal. And you can hear it kind of, and you definitely hear it in bands like Cavedweller and uh, the that old band Biolich, which was a direct Demilich clone, or even some other stuff like Nucleus. But the thing that really colors the guitar here, or the way that it makes it sound, is the timbre of that low tuning, which adds to that weird kind of slimy quality where it almost sounds like it's going in and out of phase or something, or out of tune. But it's the whole quality. It adds to that quality of it's barely holding on, that controlled chaos. They're trying to keep it together, and then they manage to.
Yeah, and considering, you can tell that the guitars aren't exactly tuned the same way, right?
No, yeah.
Because, obviously with kazoo, I don't think like I think their ears were very good, but not to that extent. And I think, when you're moving guitars constantly and just throwing them around with, especially, all these guys had cheap guitars at the time, and you're tuning that low, dude. There's no way your strings are going to maintain that tension.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you know anything else about the guitar sound at all? Because I had read a long time ago, and I don't remember if he ever did it, but Auntie talked about putting out like a pedal, if I remember correctly, many years ago on their website. But I think this is some stuff that's left over from the Swedish scene that was influencing them, was that kind of buzzsaw guitar tone that he was using an HM2 pedal.
Hmm. I mean,
But
I don't really know, to be honest, because unlike their friends in, Demigod and in Demilich, they did not actually record in the same place. They ended up recording with here with a guy called Tuomo Valtonen, right?
mhm.
And I don't yeah, and he wasn't really doing much metal at the time as well. So I have no idea what was going on, and I didn't really get the time to ask Auntie, when I saw him.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to see them a couple years ago when they came to the States, but I missed them. So that would have been some questions I would have had for him about amps and whatnot. But
But you know what I think? 'cause you hear this a lot with a lot, a lot of their kind of descendants, right? In that the top, because I think everything is it's super low but very, very clear. I think they were using a lot less gain than people would think. And I mean, there are definitely some
Hmm.
parts that are full on like really jangly, kind of like which almost not French black metal extent, but very clean, very low gain for death metal, right? That no one was really doing
Hmm.
at the time. And I think that's what kind of gives them that kind of weird alien sound as well, because no, despite how low it is, not everything's muffled up, because I remember an interview from Bill Steer, of Carcass, who said he regretted playing in B because he felt that B ended up like tuning in B standard, right, destroyed a lot of the riffs that like you couldn't hear what was going on properly. And he was telling guys like, if you want to go low, never go lower than C standard. And here we're in like A sharp, right?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I understand that sentiment because in recent years with my own guitar playing, I used to tune my guitar's lowest possible that you could on a six string, and now I'm, hanging out in D standard because you just do get so much more clarity if you want to crank your gain up. But yeah, that's certainly a thing that I hadn't really thought of with their guitar sound, other than uh, the strange quality of taking strings that have a set tension or a range and just going way beyond that, uh, and still managing to get this interesting guitar sound out of it.
Yeah. And it's pretty crazy, they did kind of avoid, the very over, almost cartoonish sound of that, like, the Swedish albums did have. Because, as much as I love Dark Recollections by Carnage and is ground zero for that style, there are some parts where you don't really know what the fuck is going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting as well because you find a lot of times when bands tune their guitars super low, they tend to just want to hang out in that low register and only play power chords or patterns on around those like lower three frets and whatnot. Whereas they kind of use the open A string and just the tuning as a color palette because the playing is just so all over the place.
Oh yeah, definitely. If we were really to look at it only from like a fretboard perspective, it is real. Like they use a large number of frets, and obviously a lot of the notes on the frets on the guitar repeat, right? But here they're
Hmm.
very, very good. It doesn't feel like they're going out of their way, when they're going all over the fretboard. It does feel connected because it's very easy on a guitar, to go 112, 112 or some stupid bullshit like that. Yeah. But here it does make sense, when they're using those huge string jumps. It's never more, it's never more than two, three frets, and they slowly move around. But I don't know, like we said, something in Auntie's way of seeing riffs where he has to go the long way round back to the starting point.
Yeah, no, it's quite strange. I mean, I I don't understand. I mean, it really is just I'm probably him sitting alone in his bedroom or whatever, how old he is at the time, trying to find a way that makes, guitar that makes sense to him, uh, not getting lessons or anything like that. I don't really know if he received any training or not, but it just
I
seems
don't think
so
none whatsoever.
yeah, and that's the thing. It just seems so strange that there's nothing orthodox about the guitar playing other than, I don't even think, are there power chords at all in any of these tabs? Because I haven't really noticed. I mean, let
I
me see
mean,
if I pull up.
before the solo on When the Sun Drank the Water, the second guitar is just kind of chilling with power chords very briefly at one point. But
Hmm.
no, yeah, I don't think he knows what what chords are for the most part.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I'm seeing some here. It's been a while since I've
Mm,
made an effort to learn any of these stuff because it's just it's so strange. But
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think like he really kind of connects. obviously he knows what power chords are, but I don't
Hmm.
think, then because he wanted to be so different from everyone else, and I think he preferred, not being stuck within that kind of very kind of like low box register, of 0 to 4 on the frets. So he wanted to, try new things to kind of really express himself because, one thing about this album is it's super fucking emotional. You get through the weird language, the ideas of a 16th, six-tooth son who owns the 14th of the four regional dimensions. You get, he is talking about himself, about how
Yeah,
life was depressing in Finland, how he's from the middle of nowhere where he felt trapped, bored to death, where there were like no prospects. This is literally like um music at his saddest. And he was telling me like one thing that really influenced him is I don't know if you knew this, but in Finland, they're really obsessed with the tango. They've got this thing like it's a Finnish tango.
yeah. You had talked to me about this the last time we spoke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he told me a few artists, right? And it's like basically so it's instead of like where the Argentinian tango is very lively, bouncy, Um, it's all the kind of very similar dance moves, people kind of like very close to each other, holding each other by the waist, kind of, and everything, but it's a lot slower pace. It's a lot more melancholic. It's
Mm.
about longing and home and everything. And you tell us like, when you go to the village party, right, where you have, everyone, where, the kids are obviously trying their first beers at like the age of 15 and everything. Your first kiss, that's the kind of music they had in the background.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check some of this out because so it's a regional thing, or is it like a distinctly kind of a Finnish style of music, kind of like how the Germans have like Schlager or something?
Yeah, it
Uh,
is. It's a fully Finnish thing that they imported from, Argentina, and then it just kind of found its own, own identity. And obviously, with the lyrics being in Finnish and everything, it slowly
mhm.
kind of distorted into something else.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing I guess we could talk about since we're talking about the lyrics is the strange kind of quality that you get from guys that uh don't really know how to speak English all that well yet. And then, I mean, Anti, I guess, was the person that was the sole mastermind behind all of these. But yeah, I was reading through this booklet earlier, uh, and they're quite strange. I don't know if I know he said he was interested in sci-fi stuff, because I mean the name of the band comes directly from a D&D reference, but he said he wasn't playing D&D all that much.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, let's see.
I mean,
Is there um is there a band, because definitely in this time period, um the regional idea of scenes that we don't really have today anymore with the advent of the internet. Um, is there a band that sticks out to you specifically from Finland that has similar qualities to Demilich, or do you think kind of the whole sound and then the what they were doing, especially Antti being like, I I don't want to be part of trends. I want to do my own thing. That it's just the result of being around all these other Finnish bands that were kind of making demos and having albums come out around the same time period.
yeah, I mean, I did get to interview Seppo, who played in,
Mm, yeah,
Demigod and
drum.
Adrenaline.
Yeah.
And apparently, I think what he said is that, Demigod and Adrenaline were characterized by very strong, somewhat egotistical frontmen who knew what they wanted to do with their music and who had very defined visions. And I think for those guys, it's not like now where people just want, hey, look at me, Instagram, hey, I'm playing in front of 20 people. Now, like I think back then the biggest thing was like it wasn't about being technical or fast or whatever. It's like you need to have your own sound.
Mm,
I think that is
hmm.
something that was so essential to early death metal, to early black metal, to early whatever, that, not sounding like everyone else, having your own voice. And I think, for Auntie, considering you know, he's got he's a very I think he's a very solitary individual. I know he's got like ADHD. He's on the autism spectrum. He's a he works in software. He's written scripts like how to demilichify, your fucking your song titles or whatever text you want, right? He's got all the kind of qualities necessary to make something completely unique to himself, right? And he's
Hmm.
obsessed with like changing letters around with his very precise way of doing it, right?
Yeah, the weird anagrams like Erecshyrinol or however you say it. No lyrics here.
Yeah. Um, so let's move on to the album. I think
Hmm.
Erecshyrinol is a very interesting song because it is an instrumental, not that it really changes much in death metal, but it's got a much more kind of overall laid back approach to songwriting than some of the more kind of furious songs here.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one because there's the only well I mean there's some vocal stuff in there, but it's just him growling on some different parts in the song. But yeah, it seems like the one where they threw in the most, even though it's laid back, it's just part after part after part after part because there's nothing, no other lyrical content here, so it's just the instrumentation on display,
Yeah.
which shows that they you know just how powerful the music is by itself with no lyrics.
Yes. So, first, I just love that riff. It's very melodic within that kind of language, very kind of stands up. And then he goes into that absolutely insane harmony where both the guitars are kind of like almost clashing before kind of like
Hmm.
resolving with one of the more classic melodies on this album.
Yeah, and then it hits that weird solo at the end, and then it's just the guitars kind of fall out and the drums keep going. Yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, that's certainly a standout place for me in the album. Um, when I was looking to find out if there was any order in the way that they wrote the songs, what I did find was the planet that once used to absorb flesh was the final song that they wrote for that album in the winter of '92 or something.
Mm.
But that's also a very big standout section to me. And I think a lot of those things, like again, like I was talking about earlier, is those it's the weird drums that are under everything, uh, the breaks. Um, because that song as well also has a really big moment where everything drops out and it's just a bass guitar playing, and then it comes in with this huge riff that's just jumping up and down the fretboard.
Mm. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, the kind of drum breaks also they don't really follow like the bars of the music, they're not obvious. They kind of just jump at you at like almost random spots, but it just works.
Hmm. Yeah, he's doing this weird where it almost feels like they're shifting tempos, but the drummer is like he's shifting the meter of the drum. So it'd be like in this weird semblance of 4/4 or something, 5/4, and then it switches to like some triplets at the end of the bar. which is super cool.
Yeah. And one thing we have to kind of like mention is obviously the bass, like because the bass doesn't really follow the guitars that much, nor does it really stick
No.
to the drums. It's in its own kind of universe.
Yeah, it's everything isolated would sound kind of you wonder if it would sound like players from the same session, you know. It
Yeah.
do you know if they recorded this live in a room, or did they record it piecemeal one at a time, like track guitars and then track ba bass, track drums?
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if they recorded it live because it has such what do you call it, such a very unique unique feel that comes only from years and years of rehearsing together, right? Unless you're like
Yeah,
a professional musician where you just pick up a tab and that's it. But I don't even think those guys could read tabs at the time. I don't know, it's interesting, but then there's just maybe too much kind of like definition for it to be a live recording, though I know that Defeated Sanity record like live and then they just do a few touch-ups after, so I can't really tell, to be honest.
yeah. I mean, I think they certainly are capable of playing live because I'm assuming that that's how the demos were recorded, was them in a room together. Uh, and it has that sound, the Four Instructive Tales, and then uh, the Bowels demo
Mm.
as well, and then uh, the Echo. But um, yeah, I mean, it's it's always interesting for me whenever I look on the archives at how people put the similar artists. Um, the top results are like Time Ghoul, Gore Guts, uh, those kinds of bands, which is pretty hilarious because you know those bands, none of them sound like each other, but the quality that they're sharing is that almost unique, where we're not looking to sound like another group. We're just going to take what our immediate influences are or what has kind of trained us as musicians and try and make something completely from scratch with whatever ground rules they want to set. I don't know if there was anything that they did kind of like, with like Obscura where they made rules about like, no no tupa tupa beats, no tremolo. I
No
don't know if
power
they
chords.
yeah, no
No,
power
no
chords,
fifths at all.
no looking at each other's fretboards. I don't know if they had any rules like that, but yeah, it has this. I think those things when you look at those like similar artists or things that people try and lump or say, this is what sounds like Demilich. It's not the music itself necessarily, but the execution of how this music is coming about.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why I think a lot of people, I mean, a lot of people miss the point about this album. This isn't supposed to be a weirdo album. Obscura was by definition a kind of like artistic experiment. It was supposed to be kind of pretentious and purposefully out there and shocking. This is just
Hmm.
some guy, some random guy in Finland's interpretation of what death metal is, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think we have to go through that. What I think as well is what a lot of the Demilich inspired bands completely fail to do is how the hell do you make catchy songs within this kind of template? Because I don't want to name them, but I've heard a few of them, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, beep boop, frog vocals. Okay, I get you. But yeah,
X limiter.
you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no, that's the thing. It's like there's that quality of imitation where I'm trying to sound like Demilich, but there was nothing that sounded like Demilich, obviously. So if you want to do your due diligence and try and make something or figure out if you can follow that thread to come to similar conclusions, you always have to go back to what were these guys listening to,
Mm,
not I'm trying to write a riff that sounds like the 16th Sixteenth Sun or Inherited Bow Levitation or whatever, right? You know.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And and I think also, because now we're in a very kind of dissonance dominated era of metal, right? And
Hmm.
obviously this is very, very dissonant at times, that but it's not purposeful dissonance. They're not like accentuating, the most dissonant intervals where, you take something like Deathspell Omega, to go back to Gorguts Obscura, where like, okay, this is the most dissonant thing we can do. We do it across 2 octaves, and we just really kind of, bend or whatever, really like focus on that dissonant note. Whereas here it's like, hmm, this is just another note that fits my geometric pattern, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, and even that, I mean, it's like it's the focus on geometry, but rather than the melodicism, it's kind of I feel like the thing that there is such a huge focus for Auntie is rhythm
Hmm.
and everybody else in the band, obviously.
Yeah.
Uh, Besides, I mean, the bass player, is like you said, it's kind of just hanging out in its own little area, accenting maybe the lowest notes. Of what the guitars are doing, but it's certainly the feeling. And uh, we were talking about this because this is kind of an area that I'm not super familiar with, at least because most of my listening nowadays has been dominated by black metal, but uh, the kind of inherent bounce quality that like jump the fuck up thing that they're always doing in these songs. The thing that immediately popped into my mind that came directly from Finnish lineage is Zizma.
Hmm.
Um, you know, um, with what is the first, the one
Was
that
it
has Why Am
Nucalepsia?
I?
Nucalepsia, was it?
I think maybe. Let me see.
No, I think wait, no, I'm confusing, man. I think Zisma's first one was just called Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, uh, that one. I mean, stuff like that. I was trying to think of what other things could have colored their uh, melodic language. Like other big songs like Caught in a Vortex by
Mm,
Abhorrence, stuff like that, where there's these like kind of there's a definite sense of melancholy in all of the Finnish stuff, right?
yeah.
That I think is just that result of the regional scene, tape trading. I know that was big.
Yeah. Wait, I just wanted to mention Nucalepsia was actually by Lubricant, which was
Ah,
another band from that region that had a lot of bounce as well.
yeah. As that was another one, Disgrace also
Mm.
had lots of but I don't know if they had let me see if they had an album out by that point.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't need albums, I think all these guys knew each other at shows, from the
Sure.
demos, friends, and when you have such small scenes, everyone's kind of like very incestuous in terms of bands, and
Hmm.
obviously, you can't know everything on Metal Archives, I know all the like Sentenced, Amorphous, everyone was friends at the time, so it's very hard to kind of figure out where everyone got their influence, because I think the closest thing they had was the Swedish scene, and
Hmm.
the Swedish scene, they didn't have like rivalries at all. Nicky Anderson of Entombed plays a lot of the solos on Dismember's Like an Ever Flowing Stream, for example, and I think everyone was very supportive of each other.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and that's because that's the thing too, you're talking about that there was like this kind of inherent bounce quality that was also coming from the Swedish guys that then eventually steamrolled into what would have been stuff, like Wolverine Blues and the death and roll stuff, which that I don't think that had been fully conceptualized at that point, but uh, obviously you can see how much the Swedes were interacting with these guys because then at a certain point, bands like Zizma and Convulse, they all kind of did the same and started making this like death rock uh stuff, you know.
Yeah, but I think the Finnish death rock was just like weirdo music, outside of music. Whereas with the kind of like a lot of the guys, especially Entombed, right? It was like, we're a death metal band, but we want to make rock and roll. LG Petrov can't really sing,
Hmm.
and then obviously, Nicky Anderson like full on did his rock and roll thing. He has got what they call the helicopters, right?
Oh, I haven't ever heard that.
I mean, if you're into that kind of garage rock and 60s and 70s rock, that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
which is I think what Entombed were trying to like they were going back. A lot of the Swedish guys, even Dismember were going back to the heavy metal roots. Grave were going back to no, not Grave. Unleashed were going back to like this weird mix of heavy metal and hardcore. Whereas I think the Finnish guys, they never knew what back was. There was always like forwards into somewhere, and their kind of like version of rock was a lot weirder and less informed by obviously by American and British rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yeah, they could. I mean, definitely think like Auntie was definitely listening to a lot of rock stuff because I think everyone was listening to hard rock and heavy metal in any death metal scene at the time, right? Like everyone knew Iron Maiden and fucking AC/DC because that shit was not mainstream and ubiquitous like it is now.
Yeah, well, and that was the other thing I read in here when I was looking through this notebook was he does mention Black Sabbath very briefly, but I mean, who that seems like a touchstone for so many bands at a certain point. You go back to the origin point, you know. Oh, he also mentioned Thin Lizzy as well, if I remember correctly, but uh yeah.
I mean, not surprising, I think, CDs weren't coming out so quickly and it was harder to get them. So, you obviously had to get the stuff that was touching you had to there was the bands who had the big singles, Thin Lizzy, they had Jailbreak, The Boys Are Back in Town was absolutely massive song, and obviously, Phil Lynot's Tragic Decline and everything.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think the Finns they managed to exploit, rock music and hard rock in a very, very particular and niche way that was purely theirs, right?
Hmm. Um, so this was the other thing that I was thinking about that I had tried to find interviews from Aki, the other guitar player.
Mm.
Um, do you know if it seems like Auntie wrote all of the guitar parts? Is that correct?
Honestly, I think so because it
Even the
sounded like
solos?
I don't know who played the solos. There's very little info, and none of those guys struck me as having big egos. Unlike
Hmm.
some other bands from that era, was like, no, I wrote this. X was not this super genius. I did half of this, right?
Yeah, because I was looking for songwriting credits, um, and I couldn't find anything. And I know that guy Aki has been kind of a state, a member in the band since the Nespithe era.
Mm.
But is there another song from that we want to get into to talk about more of more of the pieces, or another song that you think has some really standout pieces?
Hey, come on, you know the album really well as well. Come on, give me
I would
your.
really I would really like to do The Planet That Once Used to Absorb Flesh,
All right.
from let's do it from 50. God damn, dude. The freaking drum little that song to me is just since I did read that they kind of that was the last song they wrote, I feel like that's like, at least for me, and that huge part where there's just the jumping on the fretboard and you hear this kind of like almost like a honk from the guitar strings of them hitting that very top string
Mm,
going up and down. It's just it's one of the more ambitious riffs, and the way the drums are in full form with this weird shuffle that is going under everything, and then they take that same riff and then kind of modulate it once again, and the drums are continually coloring how it sounds based on the rhythm, and then that little solo comes in, and then the song continues, obviously. But uh, it's that to me has a lot of what Demilich is in a nutshell, with how it goes from part to part to part to part, and completely is just so ADD, and how they look at, has this been fully realized in such a like a short amount of time? Uh, it's my favorite, I think, on the
yeah.
album.
And the bass as well, because the bass almost sounds
Yeah,
like it wants to follow the song. But then the guy's like, nah, fuck, I'm just gonna harmonize. Whatever, I'll do my own thing. But
yeah.
it almost sounds like, and also like it feels like there are random tempo shifts because of the way the shuffles work, even has this kind of like illusory effect where I almost felt like the guitars were slowing down for a second and everything.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like to me it's so hard to say because this album is such like it's a little capsule of it, and it seems like everything was written around the same time period.
Mm,
Uh, and Auntie wrote these songs pretty quickly. It seems like, when you listen to this music for the first time, you're like, it would take somebody years to come up with stuff like this. But uh, it's like the last final realization. He's like, I've said everything I can with this song.
yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think the magic of this album because it's so idiosyncratic and the ideas are fully explored on every single song in a million different ways and there's a lot going on. Like we don't need more of this. Like this is for this style cannot be perfected. It cannot be outdone. Any attempts at doing it would just have resulted in absolute failure because the point is done. The experiment is over at this point.
Yeah, that's why I've always thought it was interesting that he keeps hinting about, and he keeps it really loose,
Mm.
that, people are like, we want another album, we want another album. But would it be like, do we need another Nespithe? Probably not. I mean, it stands as it's just it should just be maybe an isolated thing. I've always wondered what it would sound like. I mean, and they had that little EP that came out in I can't remember, uh was it it's
Um,
on the Emptiness of Vanishing, but they wrote those songs later on in the early 2000s, and they sound like Demilich, certainly, and they're
mm,
not bad. They're good songs. I like some of those songs.
yeah.
The I guess, what did that came out on the 20th Adversary of Emptiness in 2014.
Mm,
Um yeah, but yeah, I kind of like that Auntie knows that this was such an isolated product of his youth and the time period and where he was at, and uh that kind of desperation we were talking about earlier, that comes out in a very strange way, that it'd be hard to recapture that, or even, because the statement's been made.
yeah. I mean, yeah. You, it's the music. It's just you can't recreate it. Way too many fucking bands have tried to.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's things that have gotten close, but it's missing. It just it's always missing something. I don't know. And that's the thing. It's like, you can't really recapture some of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's when it comes down to it, it's what it's like 13, 14 minutes of new music on
Hmm.
that EP, and it's like, okay, cool. We've heard this stuff. It's good, but it no one he does it. He's very good at like doing his own stuff, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's the thing. It's like that's the style. It's just how Auntie plays guitar.
Hmm.
And admittedly, I haven't ever really checked out the uh other bands that he played in, like Winterwolf, or um it looks like what he was in a band called Jess and the Ancient Ones a long time ago, but I don't really know how much of a soul songwriter he was in any of those other bands.
I mean, they were a lot more standard. Winterwolf was, obviously a lot of the bands that he was into at the time. Winterwolf and Jess and the Ancient Ones have the bassist from the Vanishing Sessions, and maybe I know they have the bassist because his name is Corpse or Thomas Corpse or whatever.
Yeah,
And I think
Corpse.
yeah, and I think they have the guitarist, but it's whatever. I've talking to him, I realized he was scared because he realized that like Demilich had such an impression on everyone. I don't think he's in that mindset as well. He realized, we got okay, we cool, we got the Vanishing Sessions, but they didn't offer anything new. So might as well make music that you enjoy playing. Maybe
Yeah.
it must take a lot, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically at the time with such limited funds to make something like Nespit. I understand for a lot of artists you just want to ride the wave, be happy, make fun music. Like you don't necessarily have that kind of fight to kill yourself over, 2, 3 year period to make that one big album again. That might not even
Hmm.
work, because Nespit didn't fucking work in the 90s.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing. I think and possibly I've wondered if that's followed him all of these years, as this kind of, because it came out on Necropolis recordings, right? Was
Yeah.
that and I'm assuming probably just at the time, I don't really remember, if it probably has been a while since I had looked, but if they had anything else that was of note that had came out. Well, I guess, yeah, they had an Arch Goat EP. I'm looking here. Oh, they had Dawn. Um, Maybe these are just reissues. But that maybe it didn't get the distribution that it really deserved, or that it was just so out there that it didn't really latch on immediately. And Auntie seemed kind of defeated, and they like left the band alone. That's why they disbanded, right? Because death metal at this period of the 90s had kind of started to go on this downturn, and it wasn't cool or in vogue to make death metal anymore for a lot of these people. So he left it alone and didn't even know of the impact it had until, its second life from, these websites like Anus and everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I was just saying, this album went a long time, a really long time, without any recognition. Um, and ironically, I think the only guys who I know who mentioned their influence at the time would be Suppuration from France, and I know also Demigod mentioned Suppuration as an influence. So I know those guys were like corresponding quite a lot, kind of difficultly in very broken English, but it seems to kind of work, right?
Hmm.
So I remember back, I think it was in 2014 up to maybe 2014, 2015 still. Demilich's music, the easiest way you could get it, you had to download it from their website for free. Like that's to tell you, like obviously now you can't do that anymore because the band is much bigger. But yeah, so they spent at least, you know, 30 years, yeah, 30 years, no, sorry, 20 years without recognition, maybe 2025. And obviously, you had Anus was absolutely instrumental in kind of like telling everyone, hey guys, this is death metal as intellectual music. This is death metal on the same level as high-end classical or jazz. And obviously, and from that, you had a young Phil Tugas who's made quite a bit of a career from this album, and obviously, he's had so many projects that were inspired and derived by this, and then somehow, Blood Incantation became Metal Sweethearts, and you know, you had the whole kind of like hipster Anthony Fantano crowd who got into this album. It's like, oh man,
Yeah.
it's post rock, but for death metal or bullshit, and it's become huge, and Demilich are a huge touring band, and they're like, definitely one of the biggest, vehicles for death metal's kind of expansion into this 2020s era. With God knows how many bands are influenced by them now, right?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that because I was looking through that guy David Mikkelsen from Undergang.
Mm,
Uh that seems like one of those bands to me. I like a few of the really early Undergang albums that it's like that obviously influenced stuff like that, but yeah, it's influenced this whole new generation of people. Like I remember the first time I heard it, I think I must have been what, maybe 18, because I had just gotten out of high school
mm,
when I heard it. And funnily enough, because you mentioned Blood Incantation, I remember buying that before they had a bunch of buzz around the band. I was in a record store, my local record store, and I found that what is it? The Interdimensional Extinction EP, the one with the like Jupiter with the bones around it.
yeah.
That I just picked it up because I liked the album cover. And then the guy told me, he's like, "Oh, well, you'll probably like that." He's like, "But you really should check out this band called Demilich."
Mm,
And I went home and I put it on, and it's it's just enthralled me every time I give it a listen. Admittedly, I mean, I played it so much when I was like just kind of starting to learn guitar and everything around that period where it was like dominating most of my listening, where I'd listen to it,
mm.
multiple times a day, trying to just absorb all of it. I hadn't listened to it in quite a long time, and uh, I put it on, earlier this week, listening to it a bunch, and it never gets old. There's always something new to ascertain from these song structures or the melodicism that is there, everything.
Mm. But so uh, but it we said before, it's caught up unfortunately in how weird it is to this day. I think every band has molded their existence around this, just kind of completely misses the point. And the funny thing, the only what another reference to Demilich I found from the 90s was that out of every single band to do this, Flesh Crawl covered a song on their 96 album Blood Soul. It was Embalmed Beauty Sleep. They actually covered
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Which is a fucking which is the only overt reference I can find, you know.
Yeah, and that wasn't like 96. It
Yeah,
was like
exactly.
3 years after it came out, which is pretty wild.
And that's about it, yeah. So, I think Demilich's influence on like 2000, 15 to 2016 really, whenever Starspawn came out up and like Tail List up to now, that's really where it's made like where its influence has really been felt within death metal more than anything. Even I was listening to the newer Adversarial, which has some kind of which has some weird melodies that definitely come from this. A lot of bands are taking from this and hopefully kind of like not trying to be super weird or quirky about it, but just to incorporate some of those ideas into their own music. That's really the best that can be done with this album.
Mm, hmm. Yeah, I hadn't ever thought of that with the adversarial thing, but that's certainly there. Yeah, and it allowing it to just be a part of your listening and become, if you want it to become part of your repertoire as a musician, that's certainly fine. Uh, you know, I still at times when I try and sit down and play riffs, think of things in geometric structures, kind of like this, just from the influence, but you'll never get close to
Yeah,
coming up with anything as eccentric as what Auntie was doing.
exactly. So, any closing statements before we end this?
I think this album is just it's a testament to uh taking taking what you know and trying to, I mean, they weren't trying to follow the trends, right? It's, if as much as you can, to have your own voice as a musician and to let things come from inside and have those riffs or the songs or whatever there kind of slowly be kind of dug up like an archaeological find and then present them as they are, authentically. I think that's why this album to me is super important and one of my favorites and perhaps the greatest of all time for me.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong case because within that kind of niche that they quartered themselves in, I don't think there's more that can be done. If that album was the ultimate dead end for metal, meaning like, metal couldn't progress further in that direction, like I would see nothing wrong with that. Like it's reached an insane summit, and we should be more than happy that death metal found its way to that extreme.
Hmm. Certainly.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, and hope to have you on another time.
Yeah, no, I hope to come back soon and do another album.
Nice.